All right, good morning. Apologize for the short delay. I was having some connectivity problems here. I will call the Green Mountain Care Board's hearing of March 30th to order. Today, we have a potential vote noticed on our hospital budget guidance, and we had a hearing last week where the board members discussed and deliberated on some of the guidance benchmarks. And today, we will review some of the changes that came out of that conversation, and we will see if there's a vote. So I will turn it over to Mr. Sutter to walk us through some of the updates and changes since last week's hearing.
Thank you, Chair Foster. Let me get these slides pulled up. And Chair Foster, would your preference be to run through them all first like we did last week, or to stop at each slide for board consideration?
Let's go through them all at once to start, and then I can pick and choose as we go.
Great. So updates since last Wednesday's presentation, just benchmarks. We're going to talk about enforcement and some service line policy changes, and then there's potential motion language at the end of the presentation. So for the first benchmark, as we've been discussing, the commercial reimbursement rate growth benchmark is set at -1% for all hospitals. Hospitals that are lower priced relative to other hospitals may submit a budget with an additional 1% commercial rate and be considered compliant with this benchmark. We expect this benchmark to be applied by plan type. Commercial NPR benchmark, same as or tethered to the commercial rate, where growth in hospital commercial net patient revenue for hospital services is benchmarked at the system level at an amount of -1% below FY26 system-wide established budget. Hospitals that receive an additional 1% commercial rate are benchmarked to an additional 1% in commercial NPR growth as well, for a benchmark of 0% commercial NPR growth for those hospitals. And as mentioned in previous meetings, that the only one that staff feels that applies to is Northwestern Medical Center. For out-of-state subsidies, we did receive additional approach language from UVM Health, which we've included here, but staff's initial recommendation was approval of a benchmark of $0 for any newly budgeted amounts due from out-of-state related parties, and a deduction from the benchmarks defined above equal to 1/5 of any accumulated amounts due from out-of-state related parties. The health network has recommended that the benchmark be removed, but they are saying that if the balance sheet for a Vermont hospital contains any amount due from an out-of-state regulated party, or if the proposed FY27 budget contains any budgeted increase to the amount of due from an out-of-state related party, the hospital shall present an analysis of that due from, including measures to address the effect on Vermont commercial ratepayers. The GMCB may take account of this analysis in setting the hospital's commercial rate for FY27. For the operating expense benchmark, staff is recommending an OpEx benchmark of 2.4%. Hospitals submitting a budget with any budgeted expense increase will be required to submit an expense management plan detailing how they plan to limit growth to an average 2.4% over the next 3 years. For service line changes, we have a supplemental questionnaire required for any reduction or addition, excluding provider transfers, which are handled under separate policy, of clinical capacity at any one location, or any selling, transferring, or outsourcing of the ownership, oversight, or provision of a service or facility. Service line financial reporting is based on annualized FY26 projected impact, and we're also requiring a 3-year historical financial and utilization reporting. Just talk about how we plan to approach rebasing a budget for these service line changes. So just to orient everyone, what we mean by rebasing here is a permanent adjustment to a hospital's approved budget baseline to reflect the removal, reduction, or material changes in services, such that future budgets are calculated from a revised level. So the default action will be to 100% rebase a budget when includes a service line reduction. No hospital shall be exempt from a budget review hearing if they've implemented in FY26 or proposed in their 27 budget any elimination, reduction, or outsourcing of any service. And for purposes of reviewing hospital submissions, staff will assume 100% rebasing to check compliance with the benchmarks. If a hospital is relying on retaining some historical revenue to meet the benchmarks, they should understand this is subject to board approval. So hospitals wishing to retain some portion of historical revenue must provide justification as to why, including an analysis of the hospital and system-wide impacts of the service change on cost, quality, and access. And the board will also take into consideration information analyses or recommendations received by AHS in conjunction with these changes. And Chair Foster, we have potential motion language here related to those recommendations.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Sutter. What I'll do is I'll go through each of these for discussion before making a motion. And there's a couple, I'm sorry, you can just stay on slide. I think it was 8 or 9, Matt. Yeah, this is good. This sort of summarizes each of the main benchmarks. So I'll take us through each of them just for discussion purposes, and I'll start with 1. The first benchmark that staff is proposing we include in fiscal year 27 guidance is a commercial reimbursement rate at least 1% lower than the FY26 established amount, or for lower priced hospitals defined in section 1, a rate that is no higher than the FY26 established amount. There are 2 pieces I want to flag with this potential benchmark for the board. I believe everyone was on board last time with the -1%. And then there's 2 other tweaks. The first one is in the slide earlier that Mr. Sutter presented. There was discussion there about having the -1% apply per plan. So every single plan would have to have a -1% in it, as opposed to by carrier. I think the intention there from the staff's perspective was to ensure that there's not cost shifting going on between plans, and that could create a risk of inequitable financing of our healthcare system. So I wanted to discuss that, and I want to actually make a slight proposal to change that. My proposal would be to have this written as it is, but to add language that I can draft during a brief break, saying that the -1% must be applied by the carriers consistent with 18 VSA 9371A11. And for those, just for reference, 9371A11 requires, quote, the financing of healthcare in Vermont must be sufficient, fair, predictable, transparent, sustainable, and shared equitably. My view is that carriers and hospitals, when they're applying this -1, are required to do so consistent with that legal requirement. And that legal requirement includes equitable and fair financing. If there is cost shifting going between the plans to deal with the -1%, query whether it is consistent with 9371. So my recommendation to the board would be that we add language here, which I can draft, requiring the -1 to be applied consistent with those principles. I'll stop there and we can discuss that. And I apologize for not having draft language for the board ready to go. This something that came to my attention shortly before the hearing. We can discuss that. And then there's one other change that I believe we wanted to discuss relating to Member Merman's suggestion last week. I will take comment in the order that I did last time, if I can remember it. So I'll start with Member Holmes. Are you okay with my amendment in the -1%?
I am. Yes.
I think Member Teachout, you're next.
Yes, thank you. I oppose the amendment, not because I don't believe this should be applied consistently with 18 VSA 9371, but I believe that that should not be in guidance, and I'm not sure if it applies to hospitals or insurers.
9371 legally applies to both. Member Merman.
Maybe I could just hear a little bit more from Member Teachout why you think this shouldn't be in guidance.
I think typically when we decide how the rate, and again, I've only been through this once, but typically when we decide how the commercial rate change is applied, we've done that in the orders and not in the guidance. That's part of the negotiation process between the hospitals and the carriers. And I've also heard the word carriers and plans used interchangeably here. And so I think I'm also concerned about the way that it's currently being drafted.
Thanks. I think I support it. I'd like to maybe read the words a bit. I think having plans is appropriate. I think it's beneficial for this to be in guidance to allow hospitals hospitals need to consider how the commercial prices are likely to play out through negotiations when they're building their budgets. So I think I support this, but I think of course I just want to see the final language before voting on it.
Great. Member Walsh?
Yeah, thank you. I think all of the topics that we're discussing today are, what we're trying to do is make more visible the trade-offs and decisions that are being made as our hospitals are under financial constraints. So I think Member Teachout's desire for clear language is reasonable, but as I understand it, I support this benchmark, and I support the language that you suggested, Chair Foster.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take a break and I'll have appropriate language circulated before we actually take a vote. The second component to this was Member Merman had a suggestion as to the lower priced hospital. Last week we had a discussion. I think Member Merman, for discussion purposes, suggested 8%. I wanted to see if Member Merman had considered that more and if he had any other comments on that proposal.
That actually applies to the NPR cap and not the commercial reimbursement rate. So I would like to discuss one other thing on the commercial reimbursement rate if there's an opportunity.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry about that. Please go ahead.
So I don't know if this needs language and guidance, but I do think it's really important for our hospitals to understand that the -1%, they can go below -1%. The reason why I think this is important to discuss is that I believe utilization predictions are probably in the 4 to 5% increase utilization range. So if we have a -1% price and a -1% NPR and utilization increases, then if hospitals choose the -1% price, there's probably likely to blow through the -1% NPR. So I think they should be mindful of adjusting their prices below the -1% such that in price, such that they hit the -1% in revenue, as in number 2. So I don't know if we need language in the guidance. I think this is pretty consistent from what we've done. This is nothing new, but I think that sometimes there's a misunderstanding that, or there hasn't been an understanding that it may be needed to, the hospitals may need to go lower depending on their utilization and service mix and all the various factors they understand in price in order to meet the NPR benchmark cap.
I think that's a good point, and actually was one I wanted to raise last week and I forgot to, which is I have heard concerns, it's anecdotal, but I do think it's worth discussing, that at least in some medical groups and some physicians, they worry that our cap, or there'd been language and talking points in the past that our caps prevented them from seeing patients, our NPR caps. And to me, that's really an argument for a lower commercial price and a lower commercial reduction, given that we have high prices. I think there are suggestions that our rates, at least for high-priced hospitals, should be even lower than -1. I support the -1, and my point here is only to raise it publicly that if physicians are concerned about seeing patients because of the NPR caps, it's on the hospital to come to us mid-year per statute to recommend a fix on the prices so that there's not an access problem. If you have a problem with a cap because your volumes are going up, the solution is to not turn away patients. It's to lower your price so that you still comply with the overall NPR cap. And if a hospital thinks that we should actually have a lower price, I think they should let us know, but I don't think that's going to be the case. All right. I think we're all on board with this one in terms of finishing the discussion on it. We will have to adjust some language, but why don't we move on to number 2? Number 2 was commercial net patient revenue at least 1% lower than the FY26 established amount, or for lower priced hospitals defined in section 1, commercial net patient revenue that is no higher than the FY26 established amount. I believe we were all comfortable with the -1 in the initial clause of number 2, and Member Merman, I'll turn it to you for your discussion of the second clause.
Yeah, thanks for that. My math last week was fairly quick and messy, and I don't think it was necessarily particularly accurate, but I do think the sentiment stands is that if we have a low-priced hospital and we want them to grow, I think we need to have a benchmark for commercial NPR that is above 0%. It's I think pretty hard to predict exactly what that growth would be. I don't think we'd want to limit them having capturing market share if that's low priced compared to the regional other options. So I thought, to me, a reasonable place would be to land at a positive 5%. I think it would give them a fair amount. They might be able to go higher and get more market share, although that can be challenging. But I think a 0% is just not in the spirit of what we've been asking to do. So I was going to modify my 8% up to, which would be a 6% over the other hospital benchmark, or a total of a positive 5%.
Thank you, Member Merman. I'll open up for board member discussion. I'll start with Member Holmes.
I support the language as written here. While I am sympathetic to the lower priced hospitals and giving them room to potentially grow, at this point, I worry more about aspirational budgeting and expense growth that would, not be met by proportional revenue growth. So, and 5%, I don't know where that number comes from. So to me, I at this point, at this state, I would probably stick with where we are with this language, and recognize when we see their budgets that we may need to allow a lower priced hospital that's trying to draw back revenue and patients back into their service area, some room to grow during the budget process. If I saw data and evidence that suggested that that was going to be feasible and possible for that hospital.
Thank you. Member Teachout.
I would echo Member Holmes' concerns. I'd like to stick with the proposed language that we have before us, and I don't support increasing it to 5% at the moment.
Thank you. And Member Walsh.
I want to make sure that I understand that the 5% would only apply to very specific hospitals and not be a 5% applied to all our hospitals. Our guidance has typically been consistent across all. I'm very much in favor of more specified guidance, but help me understand that about item 2.
Item 2, you're correct. The -1% would be across all hospitals except for the lower priced hospital as defined in section 1 of the guidance, which is only Northwestern Hospital. So if I'm hearing Member Merman correctly, his suggestion would be -1 for 13 hospitals and +5 for Northwestern Hospital.
That's correct.
I share that sentiment. I believe our ability to understand operating expense changes has grown over the past few years, and the difficulty with aspirational budgeting, where hospitals submit a budget where they've assumed growth in revenue, and that unleashes growth in their operating expense. I think we can monitor for that better than before. I could support Member Merman's suggestion for Northwest. With or without it will not change my overall vote for the guidance document this year. I think it's a good sentiment, but it is not a requirement on my part to vote yes for the guidance.
Great, thank you. I'm going to support the draft guidance as written, but I think that we should, and I remember Merman made a good point that it is helpful to Northwestern for planning purposes to have it in guidance early as opposed to in their budget order. I'm going to support it as written, and the reason for that is I think we've all strongly indicated an open-mindedness to having Northwestern come in with a higher NPR for commercial. And if it is 5%, I think that's something we'll all be reasonable about. The only reason I don't want to put it in guidance is because I'm worried that it will be not actually care taken or removed from somewhere else, and it might just be purely additive. I'm also concerned about the aspirational budgeting risks, and I'm also concerned about the interplay of the other statutory factors that we have to review. So I'm not, if Northwestern comes in with a plus 5% with a plan of where they're taking that care from and addressing the other factors, I guess I'm signaling that I would be very open-minded to seeing that happen. But as of now, I'd leave the guidance as it is. Number 3, operating expense growth at no more than 2.4%. This was one we had a discussion about last week as well. There's some varying views, and I'll go around again and get people's perspectives. I will support the 2.4% operating expense growth. This gives hospitals some room to manage their budgets. It gives them some room to manage the minus 1%. It gives them some flexibility as to where to use those their resources. It gives them flexibility to deal with some of their current contracting issues they may have. And it also protects against excessive operating expense growth and revenue that's not captured under the board's NPR targets. I'll turn to Member Holmes.
I support the benchmark for all the reasons that you just laid out. I would like that the second piece of the staff's recommendation was the cost management reporting for the next 3 years. If hospitals are coming in at positive expense growth. So I think that's an important feature of the guidance this year. I'm not sure whether that needs to be in here and explicitly in a motion or not, but I wanted to just highlight that.
Great, thank you. Member Teachout?
Yes, I support the operating expense growth at no more than 2.4%, and I believe that it does need to be in the motion if we're going to require the reporting on the expense management plan. I'd like it for the next 3 years if their OpEx is above 0.
Great. And Member Merman?
I struggle with supporting an operating expense growth benchmark that is above our NPR targets. However, I think if what Member Teachout said, that the reporting requirements were in the motion, I would feel comfortable supporting it.
And Member Walsh?
Yeah, I agree with what Member Merman just said and appreciate Member Teachout and Member Holmes. I think to me, the most important part is the requirement of a plan if there is growth in operating expenses. What we're signaling, I believe, is that operating expense growth is not to be assumed, that it needs to be laid out. Why? Because our state has made clear through our work and through legislation that reductions in revenue at hospitals are in the near future. So continuing to grow operating expenses at any level, I think creates a structural problem. But I think we've arrived at a place that we're signaling that more clearly. And so I can be in favor of this as written.
Great, thank you. All right, and then the 4th benchmark was a benchmark of 0 for any newly budgeted amounts due from out-of-state related parties, and a deduction from the benchmarks defined above equal to 1/5 of any accumulated amounts due from out-of-state related parties. And I believe, Mr. Sutter, there was a UVM proposal. Is that in the earlier slide, or am I recalling that from the email communications?
It is in the earlier slide. I can pull that up so we have it.
Yeah. Right, okay. And UVM's recommended approach was, quote, to remove the benchmark if the balance sheet of a Vermont hospital contains any amount due from an out-of-state related party, or if the proposed FY27 hospital budget contains a budgeted increase to the amount of the due from an out-of-state related party, the hospital shall present an analysis of that due from, including measures to address the effect of the due from on Vermont commercial ratepayers. the GMCB may take account of that analysis in setting the hospital's commercial rate for FY27. Okay. And I'm sorry, someone from UVM on?
Chair Foster, this is Eric Miller. This language is the product of a discussion that we had with your council late last week, and I'm happy to answer any questions about it if you have them.
Great, thank you. Good to see you too. One quick one, just to make sure I understand it. So the proposal would be, this would just be for future looking due froms, but not historical, is that correct?
Actually, we did take account. We really tried to synthesize the concerns we heard from the board during its discussion last week. So this does take account of both the historical and the forward-looking by referencing both the balance sheet and the FY27 budget.
Yeah.
For the reasons that we put in our letter to you of a couple of weeks ago, we do far prefer a forward-looking only benchmark if one is going to be adopted. We think it better reflects the current posture of our work with the Green Mountain Care Board and puts in place better incentives for future action. But this was really an attempt to work with the things that we heard from the board during your last deliberative session.
Got it. I see that now. Thanks for clarifying. I have so many things coming across my plate. Sometimes I don't get all the details, so thanks for clarifying. I'll open up to board discussion on these two approaches, the staff initial recommendation or the UVM recommended approach. And I appreciate Mr. Miller being here. And if the board members have other questions they want to ask, I'm sure Mr. Miller would make himself available. Why don't we start with Member Holmes?
Thanks, Chair Foster. I would certainly support approving a benchmark of 0 for any newly budgeted amounts due from out-of-state related parties. My concern is around the deduction from the benchmarks equal to 1/5 of the accumulated amounts. So if this is broken into 2 parts, I would support the first half. The second half, I have more concerns about, given that there are a lot of headwinds coming our way, and that I have some concerns about the impact of that on UVM's ability to continue to provide high quality access, given all the other changes that are afoot. So I think where I might land is a yes on the first half, and I like the idea of having an analysis from UVM, but I would actually put more context around that analysis. I'd like an analysis and a plan for repayment of that due from. So, perhaps there's some additional language that could be done that would be a hybrid of the two.
Okay, thank you. I think I follow that. Member Teachout?
Thanks. I would support it being divided into 2 sentences only for clarity. But I support both halves of the staff's initial recommendation, the 0 for newly budgeted amounts going forward, and also the deduction in the amount of 1/5 for any accumulated amounts. I really believe that Vermonters, commercial rate players who's paid in excess of what they should have in previous years should be reimbursed for their overpayments. Thank you.
And Member Merman?
So I appreciate the idea of dividing it in 2 sentences for clarity and agree on the first sentence, which I think with Member Holmes and Member Teachout for 0% for newly budgeted amounts. On the second sentence, I think I still feel, as I mentioned before, that, and I think it addresses some of Member Holmes's concerns about potential access issues, that if this is applied to the commercial price and not to the NPR, it will reduce price, allow for increased utilization. UVM Health Network, UVM Health has substantial cash reserves far in excess of the amount of money that we're talking about here, and I think could weather the tide for a period of time if they were having difficulty generating that commercial NPR through utilization. I feel that Vermonters should be able to have access to care, and paying them back through appropriately priced access is to me, one reasonable way of this repayment occurring. I don't see a mechanism that the health system can pay back the individuals that paid the higher commercial premiums that have been used to support the New York hospitals. So I think that this is sort of a way to get there is by providing lower cost access to care and working through the backlogs. That said, if there was consensus for the staff recommendation, I would support the staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And Member Walsh.
Member Holmes had a hand up. If she had more comments, I'd welcome the opportunity to hear them.
I just had a clarifying question for Member Merman. Does this mean that you would support in the second half of that sentence a deduction from just the commercial rate benchmark, but not the NPR benchmark to allow for that room for utilization?
Yeah.
Okay, understood. Yes.
Thank you. I support the first clause of this sentence and support making it into its own sentence. I'm in agreement, I think, more so with Member Teachout and Member Merman. I think there's a way to address Member Holmes's concern and find alignment with Member Teachout, and I think Member Merman has outlined it. We focus any due froms, the 20% focus on price reduction. I believe that, though I can't think of a specific statute right off, but I think the prior arrangement where Vermonters were paying high prices and that was in essence subsidizing New York hospitals, I don't think that meets the definition of fair and equitable. So I think we do need to take some action to address that. And if we can address it with price reduction and remove any possible misconception about limiting access, then I think that's the route we should go.
All right, thank you for that. I'm going to suggest one concept for the board to think about that relates to UVM's recommended approach. What if we took the staff's initial recommendation, as seems to be what the majority of the board wants, and add a clause that says something along the lines, and again, we can wordsmith it and take our time to review the appropriate language, but something along the lines of, alternatively, the board may receive and review a proposed plan from UVM to pay back the due to and due froms to Vermont hospitals. And the point here would be that we have an option of accepting a UVM plan for payback or going forward with the staff's proposal on a payback. And I guess my point here is really also, I wouldn't mind, I don't know that our plan as we have it here is the right plan. And so I wouldn't mind actually receiving a UVM proposed plan that we could then consider but not be bound to. Member Merman?
If it's right to change up the order for a sec, I can see the appeal of that, and I think that it allows for some more time for creative thinking to come up with a reasonable way to repay this money. I think it seems quite challenging to me to actually come up with the solution that pays the money back, because I don't think you're never going to pay back the people who paid the money. The flip side to that, though, is I think that if we decide in August to not support the plan as written and we revert to what the staff recommendation is, it creates this more challenge for the medical center to figure out its budget adjustments it's going to need to make right at the end. So I would encourage, if we do adopt this, that the medical center plans a more restricted budget, so that if we do take the staff's recommendation, there's not a sudden change that has to happen right before the deadline, and some more thoughtful planning into expense management and operational efficiency can be had through the budgeting process.
Thank you. Any other members have reactions to my suggestion?
Yes,
like
this is Sarah. Oh, go ahead. Sure. So I prefer our sort of modified staff's initial recommendation, dividing it into 2 sentences and targeting commercial rate, not NPR.
Member Holmes?
I was just going to say that I support your alternative language. I also would support the 0 benchmark as outlined in the first half. And if the deduction from the benchmark was restricted to the commercial rate, I could support that. So I would have a combination of all 3.
And Member Walsh?
And I am in favor of the 0% benchmark, the $0 benchmark, and the targeted repayment to commercial rate payers. Those are my key concerns, and that's what I would be in favor of.
Okay, am I correct in hearing the consensus of the board is to go with the staff's recommendation, 0 newly budgeted amounts, break the recommendation to 2 sentences, and then have the second sentence be as written by staff, but with a clarifier that it's as to commercial rate?
Yes.
Okay, and then my sense is that board majority is not in favor of my added proposal on a UVM plan, although truth be told, UVM can submit a plan anytime it wants anyway. Okay, Member Merman?
That's what I was going to say, is I think if UVM has a plan and they want to submit it, then we can consider the plan. This is a benchmark. It can be adjusted in the order. So if there's a really good plan that comes in, it seems reasonable that it could be considered in the hospital budget process.
Okay. I think there are some tweaks to some of the language that we need to do and that we then need to circulate around to the board members. This will require a break to synthesize all these comments. I think I'll call for that break now. I'm going to budget 30 minutes for that work to be done. So why don't we plan to come back at 10:52? We'll put up a notice if it's going to take longer, but I want to make sure we try and get the language right to reflect everyone's views today. When we come back, we'll try to circulate this to the board via email before, and then we'll try and have the vote after that. So we'll recess for approximately 30 minutes. Thank you. Okay, do we have members Walsh, Holmes, and Teachout back? Great. Okay, we can resume our hearing. Mr. Sutter, would you please bring up the modified motion slide?
Do that right now.
Okay. I've made a few changes to this slide and I'll walk through them. So first, the introductory slide has been modified so that we'll take a vote on each benchmark. What I didn't want to do was to have board members have to vote binary up or down on the entirety of the guidance. So if people have an objection, you'll be able to make it here and voice your vote on each of the 4 benchmarks. And then second, I modified it so that the board would then move the Director of Health Systems Finance to finalize and issue the guidance consistent with the approved benchmarks. So you can object to the benchmark specifically if you would like, and then we would vote for the director to issue and approve consistent with what the votes were. For public comment, what I will do, since I would like to do this all at once, I will read through the entirety of this motion language, and then I will call for public comment, and then I will go ahead and call for the votes. So I'll read it into the record and then take public comment. I move that the Green Mountain Care Board adopt an FY27 hospital budget guidance benchmark for the following benchmarks. 1, a commercial reimbursement rate at least 1% lower than the FY26 established amount, or for a lower priced hospital as defined in Section 1, a rate that is no higher than the FY26 established amount. This benchmark is to be applied by hospitals in a manner consistent with 18 VSA 937111, specifically that financing of healthcare in Vermont must be sufficient, fair, predictable, transparent, sustainable, and shared equitably. 2, commercial net patient revenue at least 1% lower than the FY26 established amount, or for a lower priced hospital as defined in Section 1, commercial net patient revenue that is no higher than the FY26 established amount. 3, operating expense growth at no more than 2.4%, and an expense management plan detailing, amongst other things, a plan to contain operating expense growth at or below an average of 2.4% over the next 3 years. And 4, a benchmark of $0 for any newly budgeted amounts due from out-of-state related parties. For any accumulated amounts due from out-of-state related parties, a commercial rate reduction from the benchmarks defined above equal to 1/5 of any such accumulated amounts due from out-of-state related parties. Then I will move that the board authorize the GMCB Director of Health Systems Finance to finalize and issue the guidance consistent with the above approved benchmarks on or before March 31st, 2026. I'll pause there and take public comment via raise the hand. Ms. Peakley, how are you?
I am well. Thank you for recognizing me today. And I do want to state that I appreciate all the board members' desire to make healthcare more affordable. And I do recognize that being part of the largest healthcare delivery system in the state, we have great responsibility with that and take that very seriously. I do have some questions and am seeking some clarity and potential modifications for item 1, 2, and 4. My question really around items 1 and 2 is in looking at the sources of revenue that come in to all Vermont hospitals, there are commercial payers that are from out of state. And I recognize the need to balance affordability for Vermonters. So regarding commercial net patient revenue and commercial reimbursement rate, I would ask that that be limited to Vermont commercial payers to ensure that the impact is directed where it is intended. For item 4, I would like some clarity around the second part. So I understand that if there were any budgeted new due to UVMMC from out-of-state parties, that we would be exceeding the benchmark threshold that is here. But for the second part, the amounts that have already accumulated as due to UVMMC, are you all requesting that a further commercial rate reduction be put in place above and beyond what is in sections 1 and 2? And if that is the case, my question would be, could we pause on that and take a look at prior enforcements that have actually already made significant repayments to commercial payers, as well as significant rate reductions? Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you for your comments, Ms. Peakley. Nice to see you, and thank you for being here. I'll quickly address, to the extent I can, your public comment. I don't think it's appropriate for the board to discriminate between insurers, in-state, out-of-state. Vermonters pay the premiums for the plans they're on, whether their plan is out-of-state or their carrier is out-of-state. So I don't believe it would be appropriate and consistent with Vermont law for the board to do that. However, certainly UVM can negotiate how it sees fit, consistent with our benchmarks and our budget orders. In terms of your question as to number 4, yes, this would be an additive reduction. It would be a 20%. 20% of the debt would be translated to a commercial rate reduction. That would be in addition to benchmark number 1. And then in terms of your question about prior enforcements, those were enforcements for budget overages. They were not to pay back Vermont. They dealt with the budget overages, not specific payback amounts. Any other? I'm sorry, Ms. Peakley.
Thank you for calling upon me again. So I would like to ask that the board members defer on number 4 until we can actually take a look at past enforcement, because there is a relationship between what the board has had concern about, meaning the budget overages coming from commercial payers and the payback of that. The amounts that are in the due to UVMMC were not a result of actual rate increases, they were a result of margin. And from those margins, we have paid back through enforcement for what was deemed by the board overpayment or excess. So I do believe that there is a strong overlap here and potential duplication of what has already been accomplished. So the loans themselves are a cash basis. We have made payments in cash. We've also made accrual-based adjustments in our budgets, as well as in what our negotiations have been for commercial reimbursement. And I have no issue with looking forward and understand the need to manage the cost of care, but request that we do take another look at this, review what has already been paid and the impact that has already been taken into consideration with prior enforcement and budget order guidance, as well as recognizing the difference between a cash-based loan and our P&L, which is accrual-based. Thank you.
You're welcome to send us anything on that, and the board members will consider your public comment in making their votes. One technical correction, just because it caught my ear. The enforcements were not margin-based, they were NPR-based, just to clarify. Mr. Del Trecco?
Good morning, Chair Foster and members of the board. Couple of points or questions on item number 1 regarding 18 VSA 9371 section 11. You've heard, and we've had conversations within this construct around Medicaid. Does this mean that Medicaid must also address sufficient, fair, predictable, transparent, sustainable, and shared equitably the financing of our health delivery system? And then lastly, in this same sort of construct, I appreciate you taking my public comment on the 27th and acknowledging utilization risk. I think utilization risk remains a unsolved issue. I don't think providers can manage utilization risk at 100%, and I don't think insurers can manage utilization risk at 100%. That was the stimulus that sort of challenged Blue Cross Blue Shield historically, and I think we're creating an environment that we need to manage and figure out how to create that value, share it equally, make sure the money tracks where the risk is, and I don't think we have that here. So thank you for the opportunity to comment. I also want to thank your staff and the team there for all the work that's gone into this over the last month and a half or so. Appreciate it.
Thank you. On your first question, about 9371, section 11, I think that would be an appropriate conversation to also have with DVHA and AHS and legislators in local communities who have the power to increase the amounts that Medicaid pays. So certainly a conversation that I do support having and have supported publicly having. I'm not sure we would change anything in terms of our guidance, but I definitely think the sentiment is something that's worthy of further discussion.
Appreciate that.
Okay, any other public comment at this time? Okay, I usually call on the healthcare advocate to make sure they have an opportunity to be heard. Anything from the healthcare advocate? All right, hearing none, I will go ahead and make the motions and call for the votes. I move that the Green Mountain Care Board adopt an FY27 hospital budget guidance benchmark for a commercial reimbursement rate at least 1% lower than the FY26 established amount, or for a lower priced hospitals defined in section 1, a rate that is no higher than the FY26 established amount. This benchmark is to be applied by hospitals in a manner consistent with 18 VSA 937111. Specifically, that financing of the healthcare in Vermont must be sufficient, fair, predictable, transparent, sustainable, and shared equitably. I will take a roll call vote since there may be disagreement on each of these. I will start, I'll try and go by seniority. Member Holmes, yay or nay?
Yay.
Member Walsh?
Yay.
Member Merman?
Yay.
Member Teachout?
Yay.
And I am also a yay. So motion 1 passes unanimously. I move that the Green Mountain Care Board adopt an FY27 hospital budget guidance benchmark for a commercial net patient revenue at least 1% lower than the FY26 established amount, or for a lower priced hospitals defined in section 1, a commercial net patient revenue that is no higher than the FY26 established amount. Member Holmes?
Yes.
Walsh?
Yes.
Merman?
No.
Teachout?
Yes.
I am also a yes on number 2. You know, I apologize. I did not call for seconds on these motions. That's my mistake. Mr. Barber, could you clarify for me whether or not I need to make the motion again with a second? I apologize.
Since those motions passed unanimously, I don't think that would be required, but moving forward, if we could have a second and before the vote, that would be proper. Thank you.
Great, I'll do that. Okay. Motion 2 did not pass unanimously, but had 4 yeses. So motion 2 passes. Motion 3, I move that the Green Mountain Care Board adopt an FY27 hospital budget guidance benchmark for operating expense growth at no more than 2.4% and an expense management plan detailing, amongst other things, a plan to contain operating expense growth at or below an average of 2.4% over the next 3 years. Is there a second?
Yes.
Member Holmes, are you in favor?
Yes.
Walsh,
Yes.
Merman,
Yes.
Teachout,
Yes.
and I'm also a yes. So motion 3 carries. Motion 4, I move that the Green Mountain Care Board adopt an FY27 hospital guidance benchmark for a benchmark of $0 for any newly budgeted amounts due from out-of-state related parties. For any accumulated amounts due from out-of-state related parties, a commercial rate reduction from the benchmarks defined above equal to 1/5 of any such accumulated amounts due from out-of-state related parties. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Member Holmes,
Yes.
Walsh,
Yes.
Merman,
Yes.
Teachout,
Yes.
and I am also a yes. Motion 4 carries unanimously. Lastly, I move that the board authorize the Green Mountain Care Board Director of Health Systems Finance to finalize and issue the guidance consistent with the above approved benchmarks on or before March 31st, 2026. Is there a second?
Second.
Yes.
Can I
Holmes.
ask a question before we
Oh.
vote?
Sure.
Excuse me. Do we need to also vote on the service line reduction language?
It is not a benchmark, so we do
Okay.
not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there's been a second. Member Holmes,
Yes.
Walsh,
Yes.
Merman,
Yes.
Teachout,
Yes.
and I'm also a yes. And so the motion is approved. Okay, that is all we had on the agenda for today. Is there any new or old business for the board? Okay. I will note we had meeting minutes from last week. I have not reviewed them yet myself, so I'll put them off to our next hearing. And with that, I will move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. And thank you again to our staff and to VAWS and all the hospitals and the healthcare advocate. This is many, 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 many months of work to get to this. And you can see that there's a lot of thinking that goes in, a lot of analysis, a lot of divergent views on what the appropriate way is to go. And we do not come to the right solutions without everyone's involvement and hard work. So many thanks to the hospitals, VAWS, the healthcare advocate, and I'll be biased, our very, very, very expert and hardworking staff that's put in a ton of time and blood, sweat, and tears to do this. They do an outstanding job, and dealing with all these various views is not for the faint of heart. So I thank everyone for your efforts, and we are adjourned.